My mother called it my little project. She said this at dinner tables, at holiday gatherings, on the phone to her friends while I was in the next room. Dominique has her little project. You know how she is. She said it for 9 years. She said it the Christmas I cleared $340,000 in annual revenue. She said it the year I bought my condo. She said it the week my second hire started. She said it every time because she had decided what I was doing was small. And once my mother decides something, it tends to stay decided. Then her bank manager pulled up my business file during a loan application and read my annual revenue out loud across a desk. And she wasn't in the next room anymore. She was sitting right there. My name is Dominique Osei. I am 33 years old. I run a boutique brand strategy and visual identity studio called Osei Studio out of a 1,100 square foot office in Atlanta's West Midtown neighborhood with 4 full-time employees and 11 active clients and annual revenue that crossed 7 figures for the first time in 2021 and has stayed there since. I built this from a secondhand laptop, 3 freelance clients, and $4,200 in savings in a one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta in 2013. I was 23 years old. My parents responded to the news by asking when I was going to get a real job. I did not answer that question. I got a fourth client instead. I want to tell you the full story, because the full story is the only version that makes sense of the end of it. The end of it is a bank manager in Decatur turning a screen around. But the beginning of it is a girl who graduated from SCAD in 2012 with a BFA in graphic design and a head full of ideas about what she was going to do with it. And I need you to understand who she was before I tell you what she built. And before I tell you what her mother decided to call it for 9 years. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta with a particular character, diverse, educated, church-going in the specific way of Black Southern communities where church is not just religion, but social infrastructure, the grid through which everyone knows everyone and everyone's business is, to some extent, everyone's business. My parents have banked at the same First Southern branch for 22 years. They know the tellers by name. My mother brings cookies at Easter. This is the texture of the world I grew up in. And I say it because it matters. The intimacy of it, the visibility of it, the way that everyone you know is somehow connected to everyone else you know in a chain of 3 or 4 people. I knew this about Decatur. I had forgotten how much it would eventually matter. My mother, Vivian Osei, spent 26 years as a medical billing coordinator at a physicians group in Decatur before retiring in 2019. She is a woman of specific and durable opinions, which is a quality I have inherited from her and am only now, at 33, making peace with. Her opinions about financial stability are the most durable of all. A salary, benefits, a retirement account managed by someone else, and the ability to describe your job to someone at church in one sentence. These are not unreasonable criteria. They reflect a particular kind of hard-won pragmatism, the pragmatism of a woman who watched money be difficult and decided to remove as many variables as possible from her relationship with it. I understand this. I understood it even at 23, when I disagreed with every conclusion it produced about my life. My father, Leonard Osei, is a retired transit authority supervisor who spent his mornings in the years after retirement at the barber shop and his afternoons watching the news. He is a fundamentally good man who adopted my mother's position on most things because it was easier than forming his own, and because he did not fully understand what brand strategy was and had never asked anyone to explain it to him. I do not say this with particular bitterness. I say it because it is precise, and precision is what I have. He was not unkind to me. He was inattentive, in a specific and cumulative way that added up over 9 years to something that felt like a verdict. My brother Marcus is an accountant at a regional firm. My sister Kezia is a nurse practitioner. Both of these things can be explained in one sentence at church. Dominique does brand strategy and visual identity for consumer product companies, specifically naming and brand architecture and packaging design and go-to-market positioning for food and beverage brands. And that sentence has never once successfully landed at a church conversation, a holiday table, or a phone call with my mother's friends. I am not a graphic designer in the freelance sense, which is what most people assume when they hear the word design. I am a strategist who also controls the visual output, which is a rarer combination and a more valuable one, and the reason companies pay what they pay. But it does not fit in one sentence. And in my mother's taxonomy, things that do not fit in one sentence are, at best, suspicious, and at worst, fragile. I graduated from SCAD in May 2012 with a portfolio I was proud of and a clear sense of what I was trying to build. I took a junior designer position at a mid-size Atlanta agency at $38,000 a year because I needed income and because I thought I would learn things there, which I did, just not the things they intended to teach me. What I learned was what $200,000 worth of work looks like when it is being performed by a person earning $38,000. What I learned was the specific arithmetic of a creative career inside someone else's structure, the rate at which your leverage accumulates, and the rate at which the structure absorbs it. I lasted 14 months. In February 2013, I gave notice, which my supervisor received with the particular expression of someone who is not surprised but would prefer not to say so. I went home and called my mother. She said, "Who's going to give you health insurance?" She said, "Dominique, you have loans." She said after a pause, "I hope you've thought this through, because your father and I can't bail you out." I said I was not asking them to. She said, "I know you're not asking. I'm just saying." I got off the phone. I opened my laptop. I sent 3 emails to 3 clients I had been quietly developing on evenings and weekends while I was still at the agency. A small CPG brand, a local restaurant group, and a woman who made specialty hot sauces and needed packaging that could get her into retail. I told them I was going independent and I wanted to keep working with them. All 3 said yes. I started Ose Studio that week with 3 clients, a secondhand laptop, $4,200 in savings, and no interest in any further conversations about bailouts. I want to be accurate about what those first years were. They were not romantic. They were not the soft-focus version of entrepreneurship where someone works from a sun-drenched kitchen in a linen shirt and calls it a grind. They were a woman, alone, in a 1-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, working 12-hour days and learning, on the fly, everything that the agency had been handling for her: contracts, invoicing, scope management, client psychology, the specific art of telling a client that what they want is not what they need, and making them feel grateful for the correction. I was good at the work. I was less immediately good at the business, and the gap between those 2 things was the education that mattered. I closed it over the next 2 years through a combination of error, research, and the particular determination of someone who has told her mother she does not need to be bailed out and intends to be right about that. 2013 revenue, $74,000. Dominique's take-home after expenses, $31,000. I did not tell my mother the revenue figure. I told her I had some freelance work going and it was enough to live on. She said, "Good, just be careful." My brother Marcus got a raise that year. My mother mentioned it 3 separate times in December. 2014. I brought in $142,000. I was working with a junior designer on a contract basis. Not an employee, not yet, but a collaborator who came in on the packaging projects and whose work I trusted. I mentioned the studio at Christmas. My mother said, "Are you making enough to live on?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Good. Marcus got a raise." Same conversation, different year. 2015. $218,000. I landed my first contract over $40,000, a packaging redesign for a regional food brand that was moving from farmers markets into regional grocery distribution and needed to look like it belonged there. It was the work I had been building toward. I called my mother. She said, "That's a lot for one project. Will they actually pay you?" I said, "Yes." She said, well, good. Don't spend it before you have it." She then asked about Marcus's new client at the firm. I made a note in my head, not consciously, but in the way that a person absorbs information about what a conversation is and is not going to be, and I filed it. 2016 was the year things became real in a way I could point to. Revenue of $301,000. My first full-time employee, a project manager named Tasha Williams, who I found through a SCAD alumni connection and who came in to interview and immediately understood the difference between a design business and a strategy business, which told me everything I needed to know. Tasha has been with Ose Studio since April 2016. She is still there. She was at the table in 2021 when we crossed seven figures, and she is the person who best understands what that number cost. Also in 2016, I bought my condo. My parents came to the housewarming. My father walked through the rooms with his hands in his pockets and said, "Nice place. What are your payments?" I told him. He said, "Just don't overextend yourself." I was 26 years old with $301,000 in annual business revenue and 4 months of operating expenses and personal savings. I smiled at my father. I offered him a drink. I did not say what I was thinking, which was that I had not, in fact, overextended myself, and that I had a fairly rigorous understanding of my own financial picture, and that the advice was kind in intention and approximately 3 years behind where I actually was. I said, "I won't, Dad." He nodded. He had a drink. The party was nice. Thanksgiving 2017. This is the one I come back to when I am trying to explain to people who have not experienced it what a sustained, low-grade dismissal actually feels like. I had $410,000 in annual revenue. I had 2 full-time employees. I had a client roster that included brands that were on grocery shelves in 4 states. A family friend, Miss Loretta, who has known me since I was 7 years old and has always asked about my work with genuine curiosity, asked me what I was doing these days. It was a friendly question. I opened my mouth to answer it. My mother said, "She does her own little design thing. She's always been creative." I looked at my mother. She was already moving on, reaching for the green beans, saying something to my aunt about the cranberry sauce. She was not being cruel in the premeditated sense. She was being something more frustrating than that. She was being settled. She had categorized me, and the category had stopped requiring attention. I was the creative one. I had my little thing. There was cornbread to pass. I passed the cornbread. I want to tell you about a decision I made sometime around 2018 that I have thought about many times since. I stopped trying to make them see it. I had spent 5 years offering numbers, mentioning contracts, referencing employees, saying the word revenue in sentences that I hoped would land differently than the ones before them. They did not land differently. My mother's eyes would slide toward Marcus. My father would say something careful and generic about not overextending. The conversation would move on, and at a certain point, I put it around 2018, year 5, $534,000 in revenue, a business attorney on retainer, financial infrastructure more sophisticated than most businesses twice my size. At a certain point, I did the math, and I concluded that the energy I was spending on those conversations was energy I was taking from the business. So I redirected it. This is the decision people always ask me about when I tell this story. Was it hard? Did I grieve it? Did I feel like I was giving up? The honest answer is all of those things, in sequence, over a period of about 6 months. And then something shifted. Not dramatically, not with any particular moment attached to it. And I was simply building the business without reference to whether they were watching. Not for them, not despite them, not against them. Just building it because it was real and it deserved to be built. That is the cleanest I have ever been able to put it. 2019, revenue of $623,000. I signed the lease on the West Midtown office, 1,100 square feet, a conference room, a kitchen, 4 workstations, a wall in the reception area where I planned to hang the client logos as they accumulated. I told my mother. She said, "Is that practical? The overhead?" I said the revenue supported it. She said, "If you say so, just be careful." She did not ask to see the space. She did not visit. I stopped expecting her to. 2020 was hard. I will not pretend otherwise. The pandemic came for service businesses in March in a way that was not fully predictable and not fully survivable for everyone. 2 of my clients paused contracts in the spring. Not canceled, paused, with language in the agreements that suggested they intended to resume, but language is not money, and March 2020 was not a month for trusting language. Revenue for the year, $780,000, down from the year before. I told my mother the year was difficult. She said, "I told you the overhead would be a risk. Maybe it's time to think about whether a regular job makes more sense." I want to stay with this for a moment because it is important. She said this in 2020 when I had $780,000 in annual revenue. She said regular job in the same tone she would have used in 2013, as if the 7 years in between had not occurred, as if the employees and the office and the client roster and the condo and the contracts in 4 states had not accumulated into a body of evidence that was sitting right there if she had wanted to look at it. She said it because she had a category for me, the creative one, the risky one, the one who needed to be careful. And the pandemic confirmed the category in her mind without updating the underlying data. I listened to her say it. I said I would think about it. I had no intention of thinking about it. By Q1 2021, both paused clients had resumed. 2 new clients had signed. Revenue for 2021, $1.06 million. I crossed 7 figures for the first time. I was 31 years old. I went to dinner with my team, Tasha and 2 other employees who had been with me for 3 and 2 years respectively, at a restaurant in Midtown that I had been wanting to try. We ordered good food and a bottle of wine, and I told them the number, and Tasha looked at me across the table for a moment without saying anything, and then she said, "Dominique, we did that." And I said, "We did that." And we ate our dinner, and we talked about what was next, and we stayed for 2 hours, and it was exactly the right way to market. I did not tell my parents. There was no longer a version of the conversation I wanted to have. Not because I was angry. I had moved through angry and out the other side. But because I had accepted, finally, what the conversation would be. My mother would say something careful and vaguely surprised. My father would say congratulations and then ask about something else. And I would sit there with a number that had cost me 8 years of 7-day weeks and client calls at 9 p.m. and a pandemic year where I kept the business alive on savings and nerve, and it would be received like an interesting piece of news. I wasn't willing to do that to the number. So I had dinner with my team instead. Tasha knew what it cost. That was enough. In late 2021, approximately August, through a client referral, Osse Studio was engaged to handle community marketing materials for a First Southern Bank branch in Decatur. A rebranding of their outreach collateral, brochures, event materials, signage for community programs. It was a 6-week engagement. The contact on their side was Marcus Webb, the branch manager, who was thorough and communicative and had clear opinions about what he wanted and the good sense to defer on the aesthetic decisions once I explained the rationale. We worked well together. At the end of the engagement, he said the studio's work was excellent and asked if we worked with other financial service clients. I said we were open to it. He said he would keep us in mind. We filed the vendor account. I moved on to the next thing. I did not think about Marcus Webb again for over a year. September 2022, a family birthday dinner. My mother mentioned in passing that she and my father were thinking about a kitchen renovation. The countertops needed replacing, she had been wanting new cabinets for years, the layout had always bothered her. She did not mention a loan. I mentioned that the studio had had a strong year. She said, "That's good, honey. Is your little project keeping you busy?" I was 32 years old. My little project had 4 employees and 7 figures in annual revenue and had, 14 months earlier, produced the community marketing materials currently displayed in the First Southern Bank branch in Decatur, where she had banked for 22 years. I drank my water. I said, "Very busy, Mom." October 2022, a Tuesday afternoon. I am in a client meeting at the West Midtown office, a beverage brand out of Nashville that is going into national distribution and needs a brand system that can scale. I am presenting logo options. My phone is face down on the table, which is my policy during client presentations. I am, at approximately 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 45 minutes north of Decatur, completely unaware of what is happening at a desk at First Southern Bank. Leonard and Vivian Osei arrive for their scheduled appointment with Marcus Webb. They are comfortable. They know this branch the way you know any place you have gone for 22 years. They exchange pleasantries. Marcus Webb shakes their hands. They sit down. The application begins. Home equity loan, kitchen renovation, straightforward documentation, the kind of appointment that lasts 40 minutes and goes smoothly when the financials are in order. Marcus Webb reviews the family reference section. He sees the name Dominique Osei listed as a family contact. He pauses. He says, carefully, "I actually know your daughter's work. Osei Studio? We used them for our community marketing last year. She's in West Midtown, right?" My mother says, "Oh, I think so. She moves around." My father nods. Marcus Webb pulls up the vendor account, not my personal financial file because I am not his personal banking client, but the studio's vendor account, the documentation submitted when we were engaged for the community marketing work. He is reviewing it for a reason that is professionally legitimate. The loan application requires him to assess the family's financial picture broadly, and a family member with a significant business is relevant context. He says, "Her studio did excellent work for us, and the revenue figures. I have the 2022 numbers from our vendor documentation." He turns the screen to show them both. The number on the screen is $1.2 million. He says, "Is that the current figure?" Leonard puts on his glasses. He reads the number. He says, Vivian stares at the screen. She is quiet for a moment. Then she says, Is that annual?" Marcus Webb says, "Yes, ma'am. Annual revenue for the studio." She says, "And that's from this year?" He says, "The 2022 projection. It's on file from our engagement last year." She looks at Leonard. Leonard looks at her. Neither of them says anything. Marcus Webb, who is a banking professional of 19 years and has seen many things happen at loan officer desks, reads the room with the precision of someone who has learned that the correct response to most silences is to move on with the paperwork. He moves on with the paperwork. I am in West Midtown at 2 p.m. presenting logo options to a beverage client from Nashville with my phone face down on the table, 45 minutes from a silence I will not hear about until evening. I finish the meeting, I finish my day, I drive home, I eat dinner, leftovers, rice and stew I made on Sunday, at my kitchen table with my laptop open to something I don't remember. My phone rings at approximately 6:45 p.m. It is my mother. She says, "We were at the bank today." I say, "Okay." She says, "Marcus Webb. He said he knows your studio. He had your file." I say, "He was a client referral. We did some work for the bank last year." There's a pause. She says, "Dominique." I say, "Mom." She says, "Why didn't you tell us?" I want to stop here because this is the question that I had been waiting for. Not the question in that specific form. I could not have predicted the form, but the question behind it. Why did you keep this from us? And the answer, which I had been carrying for 4 years without a place to put it, was sitting right at the surface. And I said it the way you say things you have been holding for a long time, but have had enough time to consider. Cleanly, without heat. I said, "I did. For 9 years. You just decided not to hear it." The line went very quiet. I let it be quiet. I am not a person who fills silences that need to be felt. Then my mother said, $1 million. Not a question, not an exclamation, just the number, said out loud, in a voice that was doing several things at once, processing and recalibrating, and something that was not quite remorse but was adjacent to it. The sound of a woman whose category has just been revised against her will by a number on a screen. I said, "Yes." I let the silence run. I did not fill it. We talked for a while longer, though I don't remember everything that was said. She asked about the employees. She asked about the office. She asked, in the careful way of someone who is asking a question they should have asked years ago and knows it, what exactly brand strategy is. I explained it, the way I would explain it to a new client, clear and without condescension, because she deserved the clear version and not the loaded one. She listened. She did not say much. Before she hung up, she said, "I didn't know it was like this." I said, "I know." I did not say, "You could have." I thought it. I let it go. It was enough to say, "I know." The following morning, my father called separately. This was unusual. My father does not, as a rule, make separate calls on matters that my mother has already addressed. He operates in most domestic communication as a second channel on the same signal. That he called alone the next day meant something, and I knew it when I picked up. He said, "Your mother and I didn't realize, we didn't know the scale of what you were doing." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "We should have asked more." I said, "Yes." I did not soften it. He had said something true, and I was not going to cover it with something softer, because softening it would have been a kindness to him at the expense of what was actually true. And I have too much respect for both of us for that. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Your mother is, she feels badly." I said, "I know." He said, Are you all right?" I thought about this question. I thought about it the way I think about questions that are more complicated than they sound, which is to take a moment before answering and be sure the answer is accurate. And the accurate answer was, yes, I was all right. I had been all right for a while. I had built something that I was proud of in a way that is different from vindication. It is the pride of craft, of having done a hard thing over a long time and watched it become real, of knowing that the thing exists because I made it exist and not for any other reason. I said, "I've been all right for a while, Dad. I built something good. I just would have liked you both to see it while it was happening." Leonard Osei was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know, baby." He has not called me baby since I was a child. Not in 9 years. Not once. Not at the condo housewarming. Not at the Christmas where I cleared $340,000. Not at any of the dinners where he changed the subject when I talked about work. He said it now, in the middle of an apology he didn't quite know how to finish. And it came out of him the way things come out when a person stops managing themselves and just speaks. The sound of my father remembering who I was to him, before the categories had settled. Not the risky one, not the creative one, not the one with the overhead. His daughter, baby. I did not know what to do with it. I sat with it after the call, at my kitchen table, with my coffee, watching the morning come through the window, and I let it do what it needed to do. It is not forgiveness. Not exactly. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. It is a crack in a wall that has been there for 9 years, letting in a small and specific amount of light. It is my father, at 64, understanding that he missed something he cannot go back to, and saying so in the only language he had available to him in that moment. That is not nothing. I know what nothing sounds like. This was not it. I invited my parents to the West Midtown office in November 2022, the first time I had extended the invitation in 3 years, because the last 3 times I had stopped extending invitations of that kind. They came on a Saturday morning. I was there early. I had coffee ready. My father walked through the whole office slowly, with his hands in his pockets, the way he moves when he's being careful with something. He looked at the workstations, at the conference room, at the client wall in the reception area. 11 logos arranged neatly, the brands Ose Studio had built or rebuilt or repositioned, displayed because they were the evidence of the work, and the work deserved to be visible. He picked up a framed award, a packaging industry recognition from 2021, the year we crossed 7 figures for a specialty food brand's retail redesign. And he held it in both hands and read it, and set it back down very carefully, the way you set down something that has weight. My mother sat in the conference room. She looked at the client wall for a long time. She is not a woman who apologizes easily or completely. I know this because I am not a woman who apologizes easily or completely, and I know where I got it. Before they left, she looked around the room one more time. Then she said, "You did this." Just that. Not a question, not an elaboration. I said, "Yes." She nodded. It was a nod that contained more than a nod usually contains. The particular compression of a woman who has more to say and knows that the time for saying it is complicated, and is choosing to put it in the gesture instead of the words. I have thought about that nod many times. I have decided, for now, that it is enough. Not because it is sufficient in some abstract accounting of what was owed. It is not, and I know it isn't. But because it is real. She looked at what I built and she said, "You did this." That is the first true thing she has said about my work in 9 years, and I am going to let it be what it is. The loan was approved. My parents got their kitchen renovation. I had nothing to do with the approval. I was not a cosigner, not a guarantor, not consulted. It was based on their own equity and their own financial standing, which is solid and always has been. I want to be clear about this because I am a person who cares about accuracy. And the accurate thing is that Marcus Webb did his job. The numbers supported the loan, and the renovation happened. What Marcus Webb knew about Ose Studio was in the file and was relevant context for his due diligence, but it did not alter the outcome. My parents built their own financial stability over 40 years of working, and that stability approved their loan. I just happened to also be in the file. In 2023, Ose Studio took on the largest contract in the studio's history, a full brand system for a regional grocery chain, a $280,000 engagement over 14 months. Naming, visual identity, packaging system, signage, The entire architecture of how a brand presents itself to people pushing carts down aisles in 22 locations across Georgia and Alabama. I hired a fifth employee to support it. When the new branding launched, the grocery chain issued a press release. Osei Studio was credited by name. I sent my parents the press release. I am not entirely sure why. It was not a calculated move, not a continuation of anything. I saw the release and I thought, they should know this. So I sent it. My father texted me a photograph. He is standing in the grocery store in front of the new branded display. The signage, the packaging, the visual system my team spent 14 months building. And he is pointing at it with one hand and looking at the camera. The text beneath the photograph says, "That's my daughter's work." He also, I learned later, sent it to 6 people from his church. I do not know what to do with how much this matters to me. I have been thinking about that for a year. I saved the text. I have not deleted it. I look at it sometimes. My father in a grocery store, pointing at something I made, telling someone, "That's my daughter's work." It is 9 years late. It is also exactly what it is, which is a man who missed something for a long time and is now, in his clumsy and imprecise way, trying to see it. I am not going to tell him it's too late because I don't believe it is. I am going to let him point at things in grocery stores. I am going to let my mother nod in conference rooms. I am going to keep building the business because the business is real and deserves to be built. And because what I have learned over 9 years is that the work is the only argument that was ever going to matter. Not because I made the argument, but because a bank manager in Decatur made it for me, at a desk I wasn't sitting at, with a file I didn't send him. I want to say something about Tasha because she is the part of this story that does not get enough room and deserves more. Tasha Williams has been with Osei Studio since April 2016. She was there before the office, before the second and third and fourth employees, before the awards, before the 7-figure year. She came in as a project manager and grew into something harder to name. The person who holds the operational reality of the studio together while I hold the creative and strategic vision, which means that what we have built is, in some fundamental sense, a product of both of us. She knows what the numbers cost. She was at the table in 2021 when I said the number out loud, and she looked at me and said, "We did that." The people who saw it happen, who were present for the whole of it, the hard years and the pandemic year, and the year we crossed 7 figures, and the year after that, were not the people who were supposed to be watching. That is the grief inside the story, not the anger. I have worked through the anger. But the grief of turning around at the moments that mattered and finding the witnesses were the ones you chose, not the ones you were given. 9 years. A secondhand laptop, 3 clients, 4 employees, 7 figures, and 1 bank manager who turned a screen around at the right moment. I wasn't there. I didn't plan it. I just built the thing. Turns out that was enough. It just took 9 years for the right person to show them the file. I spent a long time being angry that they couldn't see it. Then I spent a long time deciding the anger wasn't useful. Then I spent the rest of the time building the thing anyway. Not to prove anything, not anymore, but because the thing was real and it deserved to be built. And it turned out that building the real thing, all the way, for 9 years, without stopping, that was the only argument that was ever going to work. Not because I made it, because a bank manager in Decatur made it for me, at a desk I wasn't sitting at, with a file I didn't send him. I just built the business. The business made the case.